Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Petoff, and it's great to be here today and to have this opportunity to give a talk at the Beyond Seattle SRE Meetup. I'm joining you today from way beyond Seattle. I'm actually recording this talk in Dublin, Ireland. Sadly, because of the oceans and the time zones between us, it's impossible for me to be there live. I'm definitely a morning person rather than a night owl. And again, the time zones work against us. So the plan is to air this recording, and then I'll join you live for a chat and Q&A during morning coffee hours a couple days after the meetup. So really looking forward to that. I'm going to go ahead now and share my screen so we can get started with the talk. Just give me a quick moment. Awesome. All right, so I am here to talk to you today about site reliability engineering in a talk that's going to illustrate key SRE principles through the lens of the suboptimal as experienced in real life. But before we actually jump into the content of the talk itself, I thought I'd start with a very brief introduction, tell you a bit more about myself, plus a few fun facts that might come up if we were chatting over a coffee, if I was actually there at the meetup in person, or if we were sitting next to each other at an in-person talk. So I'm Jennifer Petoff, but my friends call me Dr. J, and I'm Google's Director of SRE Education, and I'm based in Dublin, Ireland. I've been at Google for over 14 years now. I suppose time flies when you're having fun. You may wonder, why do people call you Dr. J? Well, eons ago, before I joined Google, I actually earned a PhD in chemistry and started my career in the lab, working on very exciting things that could start on fire or explode if you even expose them to air. So I work on different kinds of exciting things now, not quite literally so exciting. But yeah, so I currently lead the global SRE education team, or SRE EDU. And I'm one of the co-editors of the original SRE book that we published over 5 years ago now, back in 2016. When we aren't living with a pandemic, I love to travel, and I'm a part-time travel blogger at Sidewalk Safari. Okay, so now that we've gotten the pleasantries out of the way, let's jump right in. This talk is about anti-patterns, and you may be wondering, why should we focus on the negative? And I think there's a lot to learn when things go wrong. That's the SRE way, right? I think we all know this. And in some ways, it's actually more fun to discuss the train wrecks instead of the successes. There may even be some of you in the audience who enjoy a bit of Schadenfreude, secretly reveling in others' misfortune. Regardless, I thought approaching the talk in this way would make for some interesting observations and reinforce the key tenets of an SRE practice. But first, the positives. So SREs focus on, SREs at Google at least focus on keeping Google's production infrastructure and critical services up and running 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. But this is not just ops. SRE was actually invented as a concept at Google back in 2003 and was described as Ben Traynor-Sloss as SRE is what you get when you ask a software engineer to design an operations function. And over the years, a number of key principles, practices, and cultural tenets have emerged. So, and a lot of those principles and practices have now been adopted or adapted across a number of different companies and across the industry in general. So what are the principles and patterns that we should look for and contrast with these anti-patterns? So first and foremost, users should never notice an outage before you do. You're really looking to engineer solutions to eliminate classes of errors rather than being satisfied with point fixes. You don't want to feed the machines with human toil. And finally, SREs always see failure as an opportunity to improve, not to brandish so-called pitchforks. So with this in mind, I'm going to start with our first story of an SRE anti-pattern that I observed in Auckland, New Zealand. And I call this vignette "The Coffee Calamity at an Auckland Cafe." So I had the good fortune to be invited to speak at a conference in Auckland a couple of years ago, so the DevOps Talks conference, to be specific. And it was down in New Zealand that this story of the first SRE anti-pattern in real life unfolds. So I went to a cafe in Auckland for breakfast, which shall remain unnamed so as not to convey a sense of blame, certainly. And this cafe was very popular according to Google Maps. I went in, I sat down at an empty table and proceeded to wait. I ended up waiting for about 10 minutes for someone to even come to my table and offer me a menu. I finally managed to get the attention of a harried looking member of the wait staff. And they said, sorry, it's taking so long. I'm the only one working table service. Can I get you a coffee? Yes, please. Got to have my caffeine. Yes, please, I replied and ordered a cappuccino and also asked to see the breakfast menu. Sadly, this is getting a bit of a hangdog look at this point. So sadly, another 10 minutes passed and I hadn't even gotten a menu. I ended up flagging down the member of staff again and asked about the menu. Sorry, they replied, I'm trying to be everywhere at once. So the coffee finally arrived. I drank my coffee. It was indeed good. And at that point, though, I decided it would be better not to get breakfast there after all. I was feeling a mix of frustration and sympathy, as well as sympathy for the staff. And I thought helping them load shed would be a good idea. So maybe hashtag hug ops at this point would adequately convey what I was feeling. So I went to the counter. I asked to pay for the coffee, and it was the manager who was working the register. And I mentioned to the manager who rang me up that they really seemed to be understaffed. And the manager replied, it's fine, nothing we can't handle. Really, that was my immediate thought. Because so from my perspective, clearly everything was not fine. So if we think about it in terms of service level objectives, and I know we just finished the SLO Conf sponsored by the same organizers as this meetup, which is very exciting. So I'm sure everyone here knows about SLOs, but service level objectives are a foundational SRE principle that establishes what level of reliability that you need to achieve to keep your users happy. Just happy enough. They don't have to be overly ecstatic, but you want to keep your customers happy. And this cafe certainly wasn't meeting a customer-centric SLO for service since I left feeling frustrated, bordering on hangry at this point. So at this point, I left. I ended up going to a different cafe that was also very popular according to Google Maps. And I have to say the experience here was totally different. They had employed at least N+2 wait staff, so no single points of failure on the dining room in the dining room. I was served coffee within minutes, and my order was taken quite promptly. And I have to say that I ended up simply delighted with my brekkie. So clearly this cafe knows how to run an operation that isn't feeding the machine, the coffee machine in this case, pardon the pun, with human toil. So I wonder if they've read the SRE books or if they're secretly channeling their inner SRE. So what can we take away from this story? So I think there's a number of things that we can learn from these clear anti-patterns. So if you don't meet the expectations of your customers, they will leave you. You need to set and meet SLOs that are aligned with customer happiness. Overloading the system leads to things falling over. So avoiding cascading failure is paramount. A corollary to this is it's about people, it's not about software. So if you burn out your people, your systems in your business are in trouble. So you really want to avoid ops overload. And adequate provisioning is key. So you need to actively plan and manage your serving capacity. So now I'd like to move on and share a story about the hotel lock that didn't lock, that is, which is a bit of a problem. So I was on a business trip to Zurich. Let me set the stage. I was on a business trip to Zurich, Switzerland, and was staying at a large name brand hotel. And on the third day of the trip, this happened. Let me just go over here and cue the video. So, close the door to my room, basically gave the door of my room an extra check in this particular morning, and the lock didn't work. Basically, normally you close the door of a hotel room, it locks behind you. You need the little magnetic key to unlock it again. But here you can clearly see that it's just not locking. And I have to say, I was really freaked out because I'd been staying at this place for 3 days, And this could have been an issue the whole time. So user trust in this hotel, like my trust in this hotel, was destroyed in an instant. So let me head on to the next slide here. As much as we want to see this video again and again, I am about to move on. Awesome. Okay. So that happened. And then I went back into the room. I immediately called down to the front desk and they sent someone up to have a look. The member staff took a look, confirmed that that my observation was correct. The door was not locking. And then they went back to the front desk to report back on the situation. And they promised to call me back with an update very soon. I ended up waiting about 15 minutes and then called down to the front desk again. I was already late for work. And as far as I could tell, no action was being taken to resolve this issue. And I felt like I couldn't go to work because all my stuff was in the room and it would be left unattended and there would be a risk of theft. So I was in a bit of a difficult situation. Called down to the front desk. I asked about the possibility of changing my room. So this would be an easy step for the hotel to take to mitigate the incident and buy more time to investigate the underlying causes. But the member of staff that I talked to couldn't authorize this right away and said they'd call me back. The hotel was eventually able to move me to a new room with a working lock, and they promised to have the manager call me to discuss the incident as soon as they arrived for work. It was pretty early in the morning. I was trying to get an early start to the day, so the management team wasn't on site yet. So I left a phone number, but didn't hear anything back all morning. I eventually escalated to the hotel support team on Twitter around lunchtime. It turns out a lot of times you can get the fastest customer service response by tweeting or DMing customer service. Support at the time replied to say they understood that I'd been moved to a new room and that the issue had been addressed. And I have to say, like, this really caused me to raise an eyebrow. And the reason for this, like, let's pause for a minute and take a moment to look at an incident management framework. So when an incident happens, you first want to assess the impact. You want to mitigate that impact and then verify that the impact was indeed mitigated. So once this is done, we're still in a high risk situation. So further debugging is needed to identify a short-term fix. Once the short-term fix is in place, you can worry about cleanup and figuring out the underlying causes of the incidents. Once those causes have been determined, the precipitating factors have been determined, a long-term fix needs to be put in place to eliminate this class of error before the incident is truly resolved and not destined to repeat itself. So yes, in my case, the issue had been mitigated with the room change, but there was no follow-up to debug the incident, to figure out what caused the situation and what they could do to prevent this issue from happening in the future. So the hotel manager eventually called me back to say it was an issue with the cleaning staff key card. So apparently the cleaning staff can hard unlock a room while they're in it, and then they never relock the room when they finish cleaning. So they tap their key card, it holds it open, and then they have to like tap again to make it lock again. And at this point, the manager considered the case closed with this particular revelation. But what I really wanted to know is what was being done to ensure that this didn't happen again. Human error happens. What they really needed to do was engineer the ability for a human to make an error like this out of the system. So let's go back to our trusty incident management framework. And if we look at this, the manager had debugged the issue, and while not explicitly stated, a short-term fix could be communicating to or training the staff about this potential issue. But still, at this point, they considered the incident closed. They'd solved my point issue and figured out that it was a key card problem. But they could have done so much more. The manager basically tracked the issue down to human error and left it at that. But what the manager didn't acknowledge is that human errors are really systems problems. You can't fix people, but you can fix systems and processes to better support people in making the right choices and doing the right thing. So why were the key cards designed to leave the door open and leave the hotel at risk of something like this occurring? So we talked about how the manager debugged and potentially identified a short-term fix and then called it a day. I did ask them, it's in proper SRE fashion, what are you going to do to make sure this issue doesn't happen again? And I even attempted to explain a little bit of SRE to them, the SRE principle of driving for comprehensive solutions to a class of errors rather than just basically addressing a single fault. But at this point, the manager had moved on. So to complete this thought exercise, we might identify that that an underlying cause was the staff keycard design and implementation, and a long-term fix could then be to change the keycard business logic to prevent the staff from accidentally leaving a door open. And it's only when this long-term fix is in place that we can consider the incident truly resolved. And there's one really important thing to call out here, and that's trust. The reality is it's all about trust. Trust can be hard to gain and very easy to lose. And in this case, the incident itself, combined with the rather blasé attitude about it, means my trust in this hotel was completely shaken. And frankly, I'm never going to stay there again. So what can we take away from this story, from this SRE anti-pattern that played out in real life? So first of all, trust is hard to gain and easy to lose. So customer empathy is critical. You need to really feel what your customer is feeling and address that in a way that is authentic and takes that into account. Lack of ownership, it can be problematic. You need to empower your teams to mitigate and resolve issues. You'll recall in this particular case, the person that originally came up to check on the issue didn't even have the ability to move me to a new room. That would have gone miles towards resolving the situation in a more positive way if that had been more proactively suggested. Once again, it's never human error. Human errors are really systems problems, and we need to look at it that way. How do we engineer the human error out of a system? And finally, don't settle for point fixes. You need to put long-term fixes in place that are going to eliminate classes of errors. Otherwise, you'll keep dealing with the same issue over and over again. So for my third and final story, we'll talk about what happens when things go nuclear and the finger pointing begins. So I think the nuclear alert false alarm that triggered panic throughout the US state of Hawaii back in January of 2018 is a really interesting case study to explore. So for those that don't remember what happened, human error caused a statewide emergency alert to go out about an inbound nuclear missile attack. And I was reviewing a Wired article about the incident, and this line really struck me. So I'm really angry right now. People should lose their jobs if this was an error. And this was stated in an interview by Hawaii State Representative Matt Lopresti at the time in an interview with CNN. But what this is actually another SRE anti-pattern. So as discussed earlier in the story of the hotel lock that didn't, SREs recognize that to err is human, and you need to engineer the ability to make a human error out of the system. In this case, those involved should have asked the question, what was it about the system that allowed the operator to send this alarming message that basically caused this big issue and panic in Hawaii? And you may be wondering, so what's the harm and blame? Why shouldn't heads roll if a mistake is made? But the reality is that if there's an expectation that you'll be blamed if something goes wrong, you're incentivized to cover it up, to sweep it under the rug, so to speak. So let's talk about the case for blamelessness. Failure happens. There's no way around it. Murphy's Law tells us so. And if you acknowledge that something has gone wrong or a mistake has been made, you and the team can start working to fix it faster, leading to improved mean time to detect, mean time to resolve these issues. And also, if folks feel like they can come forward when they make a mistake or notice a problem, you open this opportunity to proactively address a potential point of failure and ultimately deliver more robust systems. If you keep hiding the problems, you're going to end up with a more brittle system and more outages, more failures. So what can we take away from this story? So first and foremost, put away the pitchforks. They are not going to help your system reliability. Second point, you've already paid a price in an outage. So as John Allspaw has said before, this is an unplanned investment. You want to reap a return by learning as much as you can. And it's never human error. Human errors are really systems problems. Once again, you can see that recurring theme. And finally, if you blame employees for mistakes, they don't go away. They simply stop telling you about them. So transparency and blamelessness are really what lead to more robust systems. So stated simply, failure is an opportunity to improve. So put away those pitchforks. So let me finish by summarizing a few key SRE patterns and principles that we want to live by. Once again, users should never notice an outage before you do. And I think that this came across very vividly in both the coffee calamity and the hotel lock that didn't. For example, I noticed the issue before the system owner actually did. Engineer solutions to eliminate classes of errors rather than being satisfied with point fixes. And I think this also came across very clearly as a cautionary tale in the hotel lock that didn't. Don't feed the machines with human toil was actually highly evident in our coffee calamity. And finally, failure is an opportunity to improve was illustrated in the hotel lock that didn't and when things go nuclear. So I think that was very clear. And just so you don't leave here thinking, everything in life is in real life is terrible when it comes to SRE principles, I did want to highlight how useful SRE principles and best practices can be when they are proactively applied in real life. So I've learned this from personal experience when faced with a travel emergency a few years ago. When my husband, he actually fell off a bicycle in Croatia and was injured. Thankfully he was okay. I don't have time to go into the details today, but I do invite you to check out my blog post, Injured on Vacation and Applying SRE Principles to a Travel Emergency over there on Sidewalk Safari. And you can see the bit.ly link there if you care to check it out. And once again, I know you may be thinking, how is this not terrible? But I promise you that there are some great lessons learned that can be learned from SREing a personal emergency. Yeah, I think it's great. I SRE everything. I SRE at work. I SRE my life. I've given talks before about how we SRE the training programs that we run. So these foundational principles are so broadly applicable to drive improvements in any number of areas. And before I wrap up, I did want to share a few additional resources. So if you want to learn more about SRE principles, practices, and culture in general, here are links to the SRE books. The SRE book and Site Reliability Workbook are both available online for free at sre.google/books. And sre.google in general has a number of short and long form publications that's may be of interest to you. So feel free to check it out. And with that, I hope you've enjoyed this talk. And I will see you on Friday morning for coffee hours. So I suppose the reality is it will be coffee hours for you and happy hour for me here in Ireland, but I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you again, everyone, and I will catch you later. Cheers.